If someone has ever tried to understand the order of the biblical prophets and thought, "This makes absolutely no sense," they are not alone. And more importantly, they are not bad at reading. The confusion is real. The system is confusing, and it falls apart fast. Most people approach the prophets the same way they approach history. Start at the beginning, move forward, expect events to line up neatly. One thing happens, then another, then another. Cause, effect, timeline. Simple. That works for some parts of the Bible. The prophets are not one of those parts. Someone opens the section labeled prophets and assumes they are about to walk through time in order. Instead, a prophet appears. Then another one interrupts. Then a third one seems to be reacting to something that already happened, except it hasn't happened yet. Or maybe it already did. Somewhere else. Chronology quietly gives up. Reading the prophets for the first time feels a lot like opening a group chat where nobody replies in order. Someone is reacting to a message from 3 days ago. Another person jumps in mid-argument. Someone else sends a warning that would have been very helpful earlier. And somehow everyone sounds urgent at the same time. A prophet shows up warning a king. Another prophet is talking to a different king. A third prophet is responding to a disaster that hasn't happened yet in that location. And the reader is left wondering if the Bible accidentally shuffled its own pages. It didn't. The problem is simpler and more frustrating. The Bible does not organize the prophetic books by historical order. It organizes them mostly by length. Longer books go first, shorter books go later, that's it. Isaiah writes a lot, so he goes early. Obadiah writes very little, so he gets pushed near the end. This has nothing to do with importance, relevance, or timeline. It is closer to stacking books by thickness than by date, which means a prophet who lived earlier might appear later in the Bible, and two prophets who lived at the same time might be separated by hundreds of pages. To a modern reader, this feels like sabotage, especially because the text itself rarely stops to say, "By the way, this is happening somewhere else at the same time as that other thing you just read." It assumes the reader already knows the historical background. And most people don't. So the experience becomes disorienting. Different kings, different cities, different crises, all stacked together without a visible timeline. This is why people think the prophets contradict each other, or repeat themselves, or randomly jump backward and forward in time. From the outside, it looks chaotic, and this is only the first layer of the problem. Because once the reader thinks they've found their footing, something even bigger breaks the timeline completely. And that happens when one nation becomes two. Let's start with the most common mistake. When people hear the expressions major prophets and minor prophets, they almost instantly misunderstand what those words mean. Major prophets do not mean more important. Minor prophets do not mean less relevant. It has nothing to do with spiritual weight, authority, or impact. It is only about the size of the text. That's it. Longer book, major; shorter book, minor. That's the entire system. Which is a strange way to organize things if you think about it. It's like measuring impact by the number of pages, as if a longer document automatically mattered more than a shorter one, as if quantity somehow guaranteed significance. Isaiah writes a lot. Obadiah writes very little. Both say massive things. Both confront serious crises. Both speak into moments that change history. But one fills many scrolls, and the other barely fills one. Editorial productivity does not measure historical weight. Still, the labels create confusion, because once readers see major and minor, they assume the books are arranged with intention beyond length. They assume the order of the books reflects the order of events. So they read as if time is moving forward, but it isn't. Several prophets were alive at the same time. Several were speaking during the same political moments. Several were reacting to the same unfolding crises. Yet their books appear separated, sometimes by hundreds of pages, simply because one wrote more than the other. The result feels chaotic. Messages overlap. Kings change. Crises shift. Everything is mixed together in the text. One prophet is warning about something that hasn't happened yet. Another is reacting to consequences that are already unfolding. A third is speaking to a different ruler altogether, at the same moment in history. To the modern reader, It feels like crossed signals, different voices, different emergencies, no clear timeline markers. And because the text doesn't stop to explain this, readers instinctively try to force order onto it. They assume sequence, they assume progression, they assume a timeline that simply isn't there. And that's when the mistake that breaks everything completely comes in. Israel splits, and the timeline completely collapses. This is the moment where everything people thought they understood finally stops working. After King Solomon, the nation doesn't continue as one story, it breaks in two. One people, one heritage, but now two governments, two capitals, two political realities running at the same time. There is the northern kingdom, usually called Israel, and there is the southern kingdom, known as Judah. From this point on, the prophets are no longer speaking into a single situation. They are speaking simultaneously, to different audiences, under different kings, in completely different contexts. And the text does not always slow down to remind the reader which side they are on. Some prophets are sent to Israel in the north, others are sent to Judah in the south. Some never cross paths, some are active at the exact same time, reacting to similar problems, but inside totally different political systems. To a modern reader, this is where the timeline truly implodes, because the books are still not organized by time or by kingdom, they are simply stacked together. Which means the reader might move from a prophet speaking in the north straight into a prophet speaking in the south, without any clear warning. It's like watching two TV series at the same time and mixing the episodes. Different cast, different plot lines, same era, and suddenly nothing lines up. One prophet is warning a king about consequences, but that king has already fallen in the other kingdom. Another prophet is talking about a disaster that hasn't even happened there yet. A third is describing a crisis unfolding in real time, but only on one side of the border. From the page, it feels like time is malfunctioning. One message sounds late, another sounds early, another sounds strangely out of place. Historical context, hard mode. But here's the key point, and this is where many readers go wrong. These are not contradictions, they are parallel messages. Different prophets are responding to different realities at the same moment in history. What looks like disagreement is often just perspective. What sounds like repetition is often urgency. The same warning being shouted in two places at once. The prophets are not trying to build a clean timeline. They are reacting. They are responding to corruption, injustice, alliances, wars, collapses, all happening fast, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes unevenly across the two kingdoms. So the text jumps, north to south, present to future, warning to consequence. Not because it's sloppy, but because reality was messy. And once readers understand that Israel and Judah are running in parallel, a lot of confusion starts to make sense. Messages stop colliding, voices stop overlapping incorrectly. The noise begins to separate into channels, but just when it feels like things are finally getting clearer, something even bigger interrupts the story. Because history doesn't just split, it collapses. And when you think you finally understand, the exile arrives. The story doesn't just change location, it changes mood. Up to this point, things were already messy. Multiple prophets, two kingdoms, parallel messages. But now the emotional weather of the text shifts completely. And if the reader doesn't notice that shift, everything starts sounding inconsistent. The exile is the dividing line. Before the exile, the tone is warning. The prophets are loud, urgent, repetitive. They sound like people trying to stop a train that's already picking up speed. The message is basically, this is going to end badly. Please stop. During the exile, the tone changes to survival. At this point, the disaster has already happened. Cities are gone, leaders are gone. The future looks thin, so the prophets stop shouting warnings and start helping people stay human inside collapse. The message becomes, this is bad, but you're still here. After the exile, the tone shifts again. Now the focus is reconstruction, identity. What comes next? The question is no longer how to avoid disaster or how to endure it, but how to rebuild something meaningful from what's left. The message becomes, let's gather the pieces. Same prophetic voices, very different climates. To a modern reader, this tonal shift is easy to miss because the books don't come with labels saying before, during, or after. They're just placed next to each other. So the reader moves from a warning to a lament to a rebuilding plan, sometimes in the space of a few pages. It's like reading messages sent before, during, and after a national collapse, all mixed together. Before, this is going to go wrong. During, it went wrong. After, let's start over. The words can sound similar. The themes overlap. Justice, hope, accountability, restoration, they all keep appearing. But the tone underneath them is completely different. And without that context, the reader gets confused. Why does one prophet sound angry while another sounds calm? Why does one feel urgent while another feels reflective? Why does one sound like everything is about to end while another sounds like something new is beginning? Nothing is wrong with the text. The reader is just hearing messages from different moments in the same long crisis. Once that clicks, the chaos starts to organize itself. The noise separates into phases. The emotional shifts start to make sense. What felt contradictory begins to feel responsive, and this is the turning point, because once the reader understands when a prophet is speaking, not just what they are saying, the entire section becomes readable. This is where the chaos starts to make sense. The timeline of the prophets looks like total chaos, because people are trying to read as chronology something that was written as a reaction to crises. That's the real issue. Once that idea clicks, everything else starts falling into place. The books are not arranged by time, they are arranged by length. Several prophets are active at the same time. They are speaking in parallel. The story splits into two kingdoms, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Then the exile crashes into the middle of everything, and on top of all that, the tone keeps changing. Warnings, survival, rebuilding. When all of this is read as one straight timeline, it feels broken. Voices overlap, messages collide, events seem out of order. Some passages sound repetitive, others sound contradictory. But that confusion doesn't come from the text, it comes from removing the context. When context disappears, everything feels inconsistent. When context returns, patterns start to emerge. The prophets were not trying to write history books. They were not trying to document events step by step for future readers. They were responding in real time to instability, corruption, fear, collapse, and recovery. They were reacting to what was happening around them. Fast, urgent, uneven. Which is why the messages feel messy when stripped of their setting. Reading the prophets without context is like reading tweets out of order and concluding the person has completely lost their mind. The words are real, the emotion is real. But without knowing what came before, what's happening at the same time, and what just fell apart, nothing connects. Once the scenario is restored, the noise turns into signal. The prophets stop contradicting each other. They start complementing each other. Warnings line up with consequences. Laments line up with loss. Hope lines up with rebuilding. The chaos becomes a map. Not a clean one, not a simple one, but an honest one. The Bible isn't confusing because it's poorly written. It's confusing because the reality it describes was unstable, fractured, and constantly changing. And the prophets were standing right in the middle of it. They weren't organizing history. They were responding to it. And once that's understood, the prophets stop feeling like a puzzle meant to frustrate readers and start feeling like voices trying to make sense of a world that was already falling apart. So the question isn't whether the timeline can be understood. It's where to start. Would you like the timeline organized for which prophet first? Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezekiel?